All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week of Techquitable. Today, we'll be going over the non-technical topics, specifically interview process, resume best practices, and behavioral interview questions. All right. So yeah, we'll spend about 5 minutes to learn about different interview types so that, we can all learn, okay, what are different kind of interviews that could be um, asked at these interview processes. And then we'll also learn more about what the interview process looks like, from the time, you do the job search all the way to the moment you get job offer. So we'll spend about 20 minutes on that. And then moving on, we'll learn about resume best practices, in which we will learn about spend 30 minutes on. And then lastly, for the last 30 minutes, we'll be covering behavioral interview questions. All right, so let's learn about different interview types. So yeah, so if you're first time or have not been going through technical interviews, you may ask, okay, what are the different interview types that could be asked? And even not knowing that could make you nervous about it. So this is why we're learning about them. And we believe that there are kind of 6 common types of interview. The first type is the algorithmic questions. So those are like the questions that would ask you to kind of do live coding problem solving and things like that that would test your knowledge on data structures and algorithms. And this is a really common question types that are asked at a lot of big tech companies to basically test your coding knowledge. So that's the first type. And the second type are the behavioral questions, which we'll we'll be covering later today. But once again, this is a question that both non-tech and tech companies like to ask. And this is because they want to evaluate, what you would be like to work with as a colleague. So they'll be, asking things like, okay, well, your personal background and what are things that you're good at, or think that you have a weaknesses in, and and also share some stories about how you kind of overcame challenges in the past, right? So those are the questions that that these companies will be asking you, and we'll learn more about, okay, what are some examples of those questions and how to best answer them later on. And the third type is program design. This is yeah, so this is asking you how to design a program, oftentimes in object-oriented language. So it kind of moves the shift away from the algorithms, which requires the clever ways to solve them. But this will be testing you with regards to, okay, how well do you know to set up a program and how to maintain them well. So one example that the interviewers could ask you is okay, well, can you design a to-do list using object-oriented programming, right? In that case, you probably need to come up with an outline of okay, what are different classes that you need to come up with to represent different entities or concepts, and what are different methods you also need to introduce to kind of represent the interaction that could be going on between those things. So that's the kind of program design. And in the fourth type of interview questions, a take-home project. Some companies also ask you to do a take-home project, and that could also come in different type. Some types of project could be a timed sessions done online, so that within that time box, you're supposed to solve or come up with a different program that are supposed to meet the specified requirements. Otherwise, it's more open-ended. They might give you time in the order of a week or 2 weeks, in which you're then expected to use some of your free time to come up with a project and present and have a chance later to present to your interviewers later on. So that's another type of interview that could be asked. And then the fifth type of interview questions, the system design. This kind of interviews questions ask you to design a system, or do an architecture design. It's rare that you maybe get asked as a junior level engineer, but as you get more senior in careers, that becomes more and more common. So you might be asked about, okay, what are different kind of technology or architecture setup you have to build certain kinds of product, such as Twitter, like Twitter-like services or Dropbox-like services, and come up with an outline and the reasons why you chose certain technologies and whatnot. Yeah, so that's the system design questions. And lastly, the last type of interview questions, trivia questions. This is probably the hardest to prepare for, but some interviewers like to also ask you certain knowledges with regards to certain skills, such as like front-end specific knowledge or database specific knowledge or networking specific knowledge based on the job that you're applying for. So, oftentimes you just have to rely on the fundamentals that you have learned during your undergraduate computer science classes, or some things that you have like learned during your internships, or like, by reading like engineering blog posts to see if you could like answer those questions. But overall, these are the 6 types of interview questions that are common within tech interview process. So yeah, we're just putting out there so that you're aware of them. And now, yeah, kind of moving on into like more details. Sorry, I kind of had to repeat myself here, but the first type is algorithm questions, right? So one example is, you could be asking you, hey, given a string S, return true if it is a pondering or false otherwise. Or another example of that question is, you're given an integer array coins representing coins of different denomination, and an integer amount representing a total amount of money. And so, yeah, please return the fewest numbers of coins that you need to make up that amount. If that amount cannot be made up by a combination of coins, return -1. So those are kind of like type of questions that you get asked during augment questions. And this is also the type of question that Techquitable focuses on the most to help you get prepared. And the kind of the tips that we have for you is to, whenever you solve this kind of questions, try to follow this technique called the 5-step approach, which we'll be covering later on. And you also want to like learn the fundamentals and patterns using resources such as like cracking the coding interview book, Leak Code website, and there's also another, there are many resources out there on the internet, but things like Grokking the Coding Interview, which is an online course. And then lastly, you just probably cannot get around the fact that you need to practice, because there's different patterns of questions, and it's only through practice that you get to kind of start recognizing these patterns and be able to solve these questions in a pretty swift manner. So yeah, so that's the kind of details, more details on algorithm questions. The behavior questions, to name some example here, your interviewer could be asking you, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Or can you tell me about how you prioritize your task? Or you could be asking about your past behavior or past story. So describe at a time when you wish you had done something differently. And the tips that we have for you is to give genuine answer. Like you don't need to be a perfect human. No one is. And so yeah, you just wants you to know whether you be a good colleague to work with. So you want to like answer questions in a way that will kind of like hint that kind of good quality of yours to them. And yeah, the good news is that you can also prepare for these, which we'll be going over later on today. Yeah, more examples on program design. Examples could include things like, can you design a calendar program? Or can you write a to-do list app? Or can you implement a spell checker and suggester? And the tips here is that you want to ask questions to clarify the requirements and narrow down your scope. That's very important in software engineering when the scope can be kind of like open-ended, and you want to and one of the critical responsibility of jobs to kind of clarify the requirements and narrow it down as much as possible. So yeah, so kind of questions that you can ask to narrow down is like, okay, if it's like a calendar program that you have to design, you can ask, hey, does the calendar need to support leap year, or does it need to handle scheduling events? And in these interviews, the assumption is that these things could be as simple as possible, but it's good to also clarify those requirements with your interviewer. And then once you do that, you want to break down the components / functionalities into different levels of abstraction. So following up with this calendar example, you may want to represent things like year, month, date, and event as classes. You may also want to have a function to generate those things. And also maybe like a handler method to also like, add it or remove those event objects. And then lastly, one last tip is to like know good coding practices or preferred programming language. Every programming language also has some good practices with regards to like styles and how to like best maintain them. So it's also good to know those things in advance. And examples on take-home projects. So once again, kind of mentioned this, but it could be a time-based online assignment, and that may start a timer upon you opening that assignment, or it could be an offline assignment that may or may not allow you to write in the language of your choice. So yeah, there could be a varying format here, but the tips that we have for you is that for time-based online assessment, take them when you feel most energized and clear brain. You probably don't want to be doing this while you prepare for like an exam or finals because you would just be more stressed. You want to find a time or like a weekend in which like you can actually like sit down, relax, and try to solve the problem. And then for offline assessments, yeah, like you can spend hours or even weeks onto this project, and that could also just like distract you from other responsibility you have going on in your life. So this is why you want to write code that will satisfy the requirement first, and then go through like if you have more time, right, go through iterations to improve your improve your code, and address edge cases that you have intentionally, emphasis on intentionally sidestepped in your first attempt. And then lastly, once you're ready to talk with your interviewer, like, you want to also like prepare for the presentation part, so you can also explain about different choices that you made, as well as like some other challenges that you may have faced. And then moving on to the system design, some examples include things like, how would you design a Twitter-like service, or how would you design Dropbox-like service, or how would you design an email spam detector? And the tips that we have for you is to think about the components / like usage patterns that are required to be supported in the system. And you also want to clarify on other system requirements such as latency, availability, and consistency. And you also want to think about what are the special cases and whether you need to use a different approach to technologies to use them. So yeah, this is a pretty deep kind of like field or like area of knowledge, and it's hard to kind of prepare for them, especially when you're a junior level engineer and you're just starting out. But there are also like other dedicated resources that are available to help you learn about them. So yeah, we recommend resources such as like Web Scalability for Startup Engineers. It's a book that really teaches you about, okay, how to design these things from ground up. There's also another great book called Data Intensive Applications. If you're into more of like interactive online courses, Blocking the System Design is also a great online course. And a lot of companies also like to share kind of like the breakthroughs or clever solution that they have come up with to solve really hard problems in engineering. So yeah, reading various blogs by engineers or companies on their website are also really helpful in learning about how to build these systems. And lastly, for trivia questions, to name some examples, if it's like a database specific thing, they could be asking you things like, hey, what is a CAP theorem? For networking, they might ask you what happens behind the scene when you visit a URL. Or for programming language specific things like, okay, what is polymorphism? Like, it's fine if you don't know like the answer to these questions. Hopefully, you may learn about them later on in your classes, or if you feel like you have forgotten about them, you can also like review the lessons that you have taken and try to see if you can remember the key takeaway. But the tips that we have for you is to like know the fundamental concepts from your core CS classes, and you can also learn about them from like reading various books and programming languages and try to pick them up along the way. All right, so just covered like a section on different interview types and some examples of that, but I'm gonna just take a pause here to see if if anyone has question on that.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the design, was it the design questions?
Like
I
system
think it
design.
was the second. Oh, it's the system design. So
Yep.
would you expect an intern to be asked a system design question? Is that more for like more seasoned engineers?
Yeah, oftentimes it's reserved for like a senior level engineers.
Mhm.
Because it does take some experience, like know about, okay, what are the trade-off that you need to like design like a more complex system. So it's very rare that an intern or like a recent grad level students could be asked about that.
Yeah.
Having said that, something that's similar to that, but on like a more like a low level scale is the program design. Oftentimes, like the interviewers like to know, even when you're like interning for interviewing for internship role for like a new role, whether you can code well, code
Mhm.
something that can be like well maintained and scalable, because even the junior level engineers be contributing to the code base, right? Um, so because of that,
Right.
they'll be asking you about the program design questions. This is something that, the companies that I have worked in the past also have asked more the younger candidates, but, things like can you design a calendar program? Or can you write a to-do list app? In which case, it's really important for you to know how to design well your programming language.
Great. Thank
But yeah, great question, Eduardo. Um, does anyone else have questions? Going once, twice.
For the take-home projects, have you ever had like any experience doing it? And do they time you, right? What kind of companies ask? Because most data structures, I've not seen anyone that have asked about take-home projects.
Yeah, good question, Mo. Yeah, I can also just speak based on my personal experience, and that may also differ for others. But based on my first experience, I have like received like both types. For like a time-based one, for example, I have interviewed with LinkedIn in the past, and for like the very first round, they just gave me like an online assessment made up of like several questions, and it was like time for like 2 hours. So I had to kind of like use that 2 hours to kind of go through those three questions, as yeah, as well as possible. For others, for like the various startups that I have interviewed for, I have like received an offline assessment or assignment. One basically asked me to kind of create like a fizz buzz, which is like basically a simple concept where you have to say like fizz buzz when the number is divisible by like 3 or 5 and stuff. But every time that happens, like you're also supposed to get a ping from this like integrated this API service called Twilio to get a text message onto your phone. So that kind of like tested my ability to like integrate with an external API service and get a program up and running. Some other examples include like designing a program where I had to build a kind of like a company profile exploration page where I had to basically also hit like an API endpoint, get some pages back, and build some like navigations around it. But the important thing about those like offline assessment is to like also have like a pretty clear expectation about how much time you can sink into it. Because especially when you're starting out, a lot of these things could be a big challenge for you. And it's something like trying to do something simple might take you like longer than you initially expected. So this is why you want to like see, okay, what is like the bare minimum that I could do? And then if I have more time on top of that, what are things that I can polish up or to make it nicer? Um, and oftentimes company also understand that you have other responsibilities going on in your life. So even if you do the bare minimum, like as long as you can kind of explain what you have done to kind of like solve like the bare basic requirements, yeah, that would be fine for a lot of companies. Yeah, any other questions? All right. Yeah, we can also have time to ask later, but for the sake of other topics, we're going to move on. So now let's learn about interview process. So this is the interview roadmap that we think it applies for most students. And it consists of 5 phases. The first phase is the long-term preparation. And the key actions here is to build technical skills and fundamental knowledge through taking CS courses, building projects, and doing internships. If you're kind of like going through the traditional curriculum of a computer science major in your undergrad, that timeline is like anywhere from like 4 years. If you are kind of like pivoting into computer science, like later on in your career, later on in your major, or like like a second bachelor degrees, or like us do like an accelerated program or boot camp, that timeline is more compact and could be like as short as like 1 year. But the things that you need to do here is still the same, which is to build the foundation knowledge and skills that allows you to do coding and make decisions about what data structure to use or like how to code them. So that's the first phase, which is the long-term preparation. And the second phase is short-term preparation. Here, what you want to do is do things like reviewing data structures and algorithms. You also want to practice on solving problems using resources such as cracking a coding interview and LeetCode, as I have mentioned earlier. And you also want to practice on how you would answer behavior questions. And because of like how much different variations of problems they are, it could also take time to prepare for them. And we think that for most students, the timeline for this is at least several months. So you also want to kind of bake that into your expectation that, yeah, it will take several months of dedicated practice and time to get prepared in the short term for these job interviews. Yeah, and then the third phase is job search. So once you feel like you're pretty confident to take on interviews, you can also start to do job search. So you should also do things like exploring what companies and roles you would like to work in. You also want to build a list of companies that you want to apply for, and just like keep track of their company websites and the job link and the contact person and whatnot. And then you can do this using company websites, job search tools. Referrals is a great way to get intro into like an interview process. And if you also like college students, definitely go to your college career fairs where a lot of companies come in to recruit junior level engineers. So yeah, so do all those things. And we also think that the timeline for this is several months. So also bake that into your expectation. And then now gonna move into phase 4 or the interview. So let's say that you have actually applied for interviews and a few weeks, a few months later, you hear back from them. Then what do you do when that happens? So here you want to keep up good communication with your recruiters. They'll kind of serve as your river guide to kind of navigate to help you navigate through the entire process. And you also want to focus on passing each round by doing what you have been practicing. And you also don't want to put like all your eggs in one basket and hope that that one company interview goes well. You want to keep on making other options by continuing to apply to other jobs and following up on the process. Because the best thing that you can end up in is to have like multiple job offers that you can choose from. So that's what that's the best position that you want to be in. And for this process or this phase, we also think that it can take anywhere from like 2 to 6 weeks or even longer, depending on how long you're looking for a job. And then lastly is the decision time. So let's say that everything went well and you were able to receive one or more offers, then this is when you want to decide if you'll be happy working in the offered roles. So to figure it out, you can do things like talking to a hiring manager, future teammates, friends working at the company for insight about what we like to work there. Some company also host prospective candidates for like a lunch meeting. So yeah, see if you can like explore that option and visit the office or like talk to the potential teammates and whatnot. So yeah, and oftentimes once they give you a job offer, the timeline to respond to that is 1 or 2 weeks. This is kind of true for the most cases, but I think for a lot of college students or new grad roles, oftentimes that timeline is longer. So yeah, they might give you something like a month or 2 months for you to think about it and respond with whether you want to take up that role or not. All right, so that was kind of like the interview roadmap. Now we're gonna dive deeper into what interview rounds look like. So the first round, it often starts with resume screen. So you apply to companies with your resume, and the resume, basically resume reviewers would check it. And if your resume suggests that you would be qualified for the job, you can expect a follow-up from your recruiter to be passed to the next round or receive standard rejection message. That didn't end up being the case. But yeah, once you basically get past to the next round, it basically it becomes like a recruiter call. So oftentimes this is like a 30-minute phone call with the recruiter, and will be conversations around your background, why you applied, and what the process will be. So you don't, hopefully you shouldn't feel like, you don't have to feel nervous yet. Yeah, just like kind of stay comfortable, explain your background, and yeah, make yourself like excited about the roles. And then the conversation goes well, then you'll get moved to the next round, which is the remote technical rounds. So for this round, oftentimes the format is it's a 60-minute session with a technical interviewer, and it will be conducted over like phone or video call, with like an online code editor or document. And it will involve questions around like data structures and algorithms and system designs. And you can also expect to go through like 1 to like 2 remote technical rounds. So yeah, this is the kind of initial technical rounds. And once you pass those, then you can expect to move on to the on-site interview. Or like, now that we're kind of living in this post-COVID world, this can also be done completely remote. But the format of this is that it's going to be like a 1-day event where you have like 3 to 6 interview sessions. One of them will be like a non-technical interview over lunch, or like, over a different phone call, so that you can like actually get to learn more about the cultures and the roles of that job. But then the format will be kind of following the similar format as the remote technical rounds, right? But it would be just kind of like more questions to test your coding or in the computer science knowledge. So yeah, so these are the different rounds that are pretty common at these tech companies. There are some variations of this, of course, like for example, like after resume screen, you might be automatically invited to do the online assessment, for example, and then go through a recruiter call, right? Or you might be invited to a recruiter call and then be asked to do like take-home projects. So yeah, there are some variations that can involve different like type of interview format that we talked about earlier. But for most companies, I think this is the standard process. All right, now I'm going to dive even deeper about what actually happens within that 1 hour long technical round. So usually this is what the interview flow looks like. So for the first like 5 to 10 minutes, it will be spent on introduction. You get to hear about what your interview does at the company, and you can also introduce yourself and your background. And yeah, you can also like answer questions about your past experience if it's asked. Excuse me. So yeah, so you'll be spending 5 to 10 minutes on it. Just to give one note, be careful about extending your introduction way too much. Sometimes you get really excited about being on an interview, and you like to also sell yourself, so you go on this like extended introduction. But that kind of runs the risk of like running it too long and cutting away your time from like an actual problem solving. So yeah, make sure you stay within that range of 5 to 10 minutes so that you can also have enough time for problem solving. And speaking of problem solving, which we're going to go into next. So this is like kind of like the bulk core of the technical round interview, where you'll be spending 45 to 50 minutes on actually solving the questions. And usually you expect to solve like 1 or 2 technical questions with working code and answers for like time and space complexity, which we'll also learn about it next week. And yeah, in your interview goes over his problems along with some examples. So yeah, so in that in that moment, you also want to take some time to make sure you understand the problem and ask questions. Is there anything that you're not sure about? And you can also just think and take another pause there to think about how you would solve the problem. And once you're ready, you can start sharing your thought process. And we'll also be learning about how to like best do this, but we want to be following the 5-step approach. So you want to describe the brute force like approach to establish a baseline. And then hopefully you can also come up with like a more optimal approach using like different data structures and algorithms to make it more efficient in terms of like time and space complexity. And once you do that and get verified or get on the same page with the interviewer, you want to start coding your proposed solutions. And once you write your proposed solution, you want to write test cases to make sure that it will return what you expect. And oftentimes your code is not going to run properly the first time. There might be some code syntax issue. There might be some bug that you have to fix to handle for edge cases and things like that. So yeah, don't fret about that. Just try to like read the error messages that your console returns you, and you want to debug your code until your code runs properly. And then once you've done all that, interviewers would like to often ask, okay, what is like this time and space complexity of your solution? And oftentimes, if the question is really easy, then your interviewer might ask you a follow-up question. So you want to repeat the same process for the second follow-up questions. So yeah, so all that problem solving will be done for 45 to 50 minutes. And lastly, for the last 5 minutes or like last few minutes on an interview, will be reserved for Q&A. So you will have an opportunity to learn more about the job and show that you're excited because it's a two-way street with you and your interviewer. And yeah, you also want to use that time to like, learn about the role and like the company cultures and what the day-to-day looks like. As long as you can kind of do that throughout your interview process with multiple interviewers, hopefully you can like better like build a picture of like what that role looks like for you. So yeah, this is kind of like a detailed view of what actually happens in that 1 hour like technical interview round. And now to kind of show you guys, okay, what are the things, what are the aspects that are being evaluated on behind the scene? Once again, this may not apply to like, all companies uniformly, right? I'm pretty sure like, most companies have like different aspects they would like to think about in terms of evaluating candidates. But this is definitely what we think is a common pattern. So the first like theme is the problem solving / like analytical skills, in which the interviewers are thinking, okay, did you need much help solving the problem, or like how optimal was your solution, and then like how long did it take for you to arrive at a solution, right? So this is like a theme in which like you'll be evaluated on with regards to your strength in problem solving or like analytical skills. And the second theme is technical knowledge or coding skills. This is somewhat similar to problem solving, but also like different. And kind of type of questions the interviewer would ask themselves is like, hey, like, was this candidate able to implement a working solution? Was the code clean and organized? Did the code handle edge cases? Or did the solutions, did the candidate, or did you know the solution's time and space complexity? And lastly, like, did the candidate or did you think about trade-offs for your solution and stuff? So yeah, this is more like focused on like an actual technical side of like a technical aspect of an interview. And those are the questions that the interviewers would ask themselves. And then the third aspect is communication / culture fit. And the interviewers will be asking themselves, like, did you communicate well with your interviewer? How did you handle running into blockers? Like, did you feel like just frustrated and show that expression? Or it's like, did you actually, face it calmly and was also able to ask like for hints in like a nice way and stuff. And yeah, and based on like also the behavioral interview questions, the interviewer could be also like asking themselves like, okay, does your personality and values fit well with the company and the team that you'll be working for? So yeah, that's the kind of communication / culture fit aspect. And lastly, it's the experience or ability to learn. The parentheses like ability to learn, and that applies more for like junior level engineers, but It's questions such as like, have you worked on large projects in like a team setting? Or like, have you made good technical decisions in the past? Or do you show signs that you can learn things quickly? Or do you show drive, initiative, grit, or like any other important factors that would suggest that you'll be successful in your job? So yeah, as a junior level engineers, of course, like the level of experience is not that like, deep. So like your experience might be like limited to your experience working in group projects in school or internship projects. And that's completely fine. Like your interviewers understand that. So if you already have some of those experiences, you could share that and try to show that you'll be like a good teammate to work with. But even if that ends up being not being the case, like you can also still try to hint that, okay, you could be like really dedicated for your like toward the job, or like or be able to learn things quickly. So you can try to like share anecdotes or like things that you have done in the past that suggest those qualities, because oftentimes that's like another criteria or an aspect that that interviewers would think about as they're evaluating like the qualification of candidates. All right, so now that we come talk about the kind of like starting from like an overall or like high level like overview of interview process to the nitty gritty details of what actually happens in that 1 hour interview, and then also we talked about, okay, what the interviewers actually look for, right? Now we kind of want to know, okay, how can I best prepare for this? So first, you want to prepare a great resume. Um, Great resume would definitely highlight your background and make you stand out from the crowd. So to do that, you basically want to have a really clean and like organized looking resume that's easy and pleasant to look at. And we'll like learn about that later. And you also want to like review data structure and algos. So you want to use resources such as your textbooks and cracking a coding interview, so that you are fluent in like different data structures and algorithms. And you also want to know your big O. Big O, we'll be learning about it next week. But you want to understand what time and space complexity is, and how to calculate them. If you haven't heard of time and space complexity, that's fine. Or you may have heard as like in other words like runtime or memory requirements. They pretty much mean the same thing. But yeah, you also want to know what your solutions like time and space complexity is, because oftentimes that's another thing that's gonna get asked in these interviews. And the fourth thing that you can do is to practice, right? Practice, practice, practice. Like you want to practice different types of questions so that you can start seeing the patterns. And then the fifth thing that you can do here is to practice sharing your thought process. Yeah, not only do you have to solve problems, you also need to be able to communicate, because that's also another major criteria in a lot of these interviews. So you want to make sure you know how to share your thought process while you solve this. I know this kind of feels unnatural when you're first starting out, but it will get easier over time. And yeah, and if you're not the, if you don't feel confident in your like kind of like thought process sharing, what you can do is to like actually like write down your thought process first and just practice reading them. That's like another alternative way that you can try practicing, and especially if you're not like a confident public speaker, because at least like, okay, now you can kind of like work on your thought process part, and then later like additional practice on sharing that, so that you kind of separate out the two things that you need to do to do this part well. And then lastly, you can also do mock interviews. So find your friends or find your mentors, do mock interviews. Mock interviews are important because it's going to simulate that kind of like pressure, or like from time, or having to do this exercise in front of a person that you would like inherently face in actual interviews. So you want to kind of like simulate that as much as possible in these mock interviews, so that you also get used to those pressures, and hopefully also get feedback from your interviewer. All right, so that kind of covered the interview process. So again, I'm going to take a pause here to see if anyone has questions. Does anyone have questions about what we just talked about? Going once. Going twice. Going thrice. Okay, so I assume no one has questions and we can just move on then. All right. So for this sections, we'll be learning about resume best practices. All right, so motivation should be pretty clear based on what we have talked about just now, but resume screening evaluates whether a candidate's skills, experience, and indications are suitable for a role. And you want to have a great resume because they can draw the attention of the interviewer and help you get to the next interview round. So some common questions that people may ask about how to set up their resume include things like length, like how long do I make my resume, or content, like what do I write in my resume, or like could be like things like style, like how do I write my experience and accomplishment in a way that stands out. And lastly, organization, like, how can I organize my resume? So today we'll go over those like common questions and try to like share some best practices around that. So first of all, to talk about length, the best practice or the recommendation that we have is to keep it to 1 page. And this is because as a junior and less experienced candidate, like 1 page is all you need. And recruiters only spend like a short fixed amount of time, like usually something like 20 to 30 seconds scanning through like resume. So you want to make sure you have a really succinct resume that summarizes the accomplishment in an easily digestible format. So oftentimes, you may have some accomplishment you want to share, from the time you were in like middle school, high school, or things that you have done like outside of school. But you really want to be, focus on, okay, what are like really important things that I should share with my interviewer so that I can best highlight my qualification as a software engineer or good coworker, right? So those are kind of like the aspects that you should focus on and really kind of keep it short to 1 page. Next up, with regard to content. So these are the things you want to include. Doesn't have to be in specific orders, but you have to include things like name, contact, education, work experience. You can have some projects, like include like things that you have worked, through both classes or like outside of classes. And then lastly, you also want to have sections highlighting your skills or like language, programming language knowledges. And now we're gonna kind of like dive deeper into each one of them. But for experience, we want to prioritize on including the roles that are relevant to engineering. Like, yeah, if you haven't worked in like engineering related roles, that's fine. But it's okay if you have just like maybe spend like one of the college summers working in an ice cream shop as like a server. You can still put that. But of course, like you have like more related roles, then you should prioritize putting that. So even if it's like some like IT related roles, such as like maybe you worked as like IT technician at your college's library, right? You can put that and also just describe what you have done in that role. Because at least that way you can kind of like try to highlight that, okay, you had that experience working with like technology, and that could be a good sign for a lot of interviewers. All right, next up, moving on to projects. So you want to write about projects, present yourself as more experienced. So you want to include like, 2 to 4 most significant projects you have worked on. And for each project, you want to state what the project was and which languages or technologies was used. And then moving on to skills, you want to also list your skills, increase your chance to be seen as a good fit. The reason why we also like recommend you to do this is that some companies actually also use like automated resume screening before even having a person look at it. And for these like resume screening software, they might be looking for certain keywords to see if there's a match between your skills versus the skill requirement for like an open job position. So you want to like list things that you're actually familiar with or know how to use. So you can like list technical software that you know how to use, such as like maybe Linux, Visual Studio, IntelliJ, or Xcode. These are like all like operating systems or like IDEs. And then you can also list the programming languages, technologies that you know. So you can like, for example, use this one format or list to put down the languages you know. So you can put down maybe like Java, it's like, okay, an expert level, C++ a proficient, or like, Python also proficient, or maybe just like a beginner level. Or if you know like a lot more than that, you can also try to use a table format to list all those things so that you could have like one column that's dedicated to all languages, another column dedicated to like highlighting the front end knowledge, and even yet another column to like highlight back-end related technologies or tools that you know how to use. But key things is to like only list the things that you know how to use or that you know about, because chances are you might get asked about like those things, and you really don't want to be in a position where you get asked and you really don't know the answer to that, because that will kind of cast like some suspicion around how much of the rest of your resume is true or not. So you want to like kind of stay true to your knowledge, to your own knowledge, and represent this as truthfully as possible. So yeah, that's kind of our tip on listing up your skills on your resume. And now we're going to move on to styles. So with regard to styles, you want to write in like strong bullet points. So focusing on accomplishment, show what you did, how you did, and what the results were. And the one example format is, okay, you can say, I accomplished X by implementing Y, which led to result Z, right? This is kind of like the best way to do it because it shows you what you did, how you did, and what good outcome came out of it. So yeah, so that's kind of like ideal format you want to put it in. Of course, for like some short-term project or for school project, the outcome part can be like not clear. So sometimes you may not be able to put that, but even that, despite that, you can still tell what you have done and how you did it at minimum. So yeah, just to kind of go with some examples, like an okay way to write it would be to just, to just say what you did, which is like, I built a data exploration tool. But something better would be to say, I address company's data discovery issue by building a data exploration tool. Because now you described what you did and how you did it, or like what outcome that achieved, right? But then the best way to kind of like, highlight the same point is to say something like, I addressed data discovery issue by building a data exploration tool that led to 20% reduction in bug reports related to data issues. Now there's like even like a specific number of metrics that could highlight the positive outcome that you produced with the things that you have created, right? Once again, now I know that's hard to do with internship projects or like school projects, but that's the kind of like an ideal format you want to get yourself close to. All right, now let's talk about organizations. So once again, there are many variations of ways to like organize a resume. The common themes or aspects include things like clearly divided sections for each one of your majors, starting with your name, education, experience, projects, and skills. You want to clearly divide them. You also want to have consistent spacing. Make sure like there's only one space in a space like where it's supposed to be like in the normal space, right? Or maybe you want to introduce an extra space to kind of divide up different areas of your resume. But make sure they're consistent across like different places. You also want to make sure they're horizontally aligned. So going from bullet point to bullet point, make sure like, okay, the bullet point are in the same sizes and they start in the same exact line or position. And you also want to have a good font family and styles. Like this is not a time where you want to experiment with your font style. Maybe save that for like your art project or like different presentation. But for your resume, it could be the most boring font style as long as it becomes like stays like easy to read for an interviewer. So yeah, so those are the tips that we had. If you have never built resume or you don't have one, but and you want to just create something from scratch, we have an example template that you can copy off from and start building through this link. I will be sharing out this slide later as well as the link, so then you can actually use this as a resource. So just a heads up on what you can be using to build your resume. Yeah, and otherwise to highlight some other resources. So we already mentioned this Techquitable resume template, but a lot of like major job searching websites also have resume builder available for free. So Indeed is like a major job search website, and they have like a free resume builder that you can like use it to build your own resume. LinkedIn also has the beta version that's also for free. So feel free to also check it out and build your resume out of it. All right, we talked about resumes, best practices, and so I'm going to take a pause here. But any questions about how to best set up your resume?
Is it bad to put too many skills? Because some people, when they see that you have a lot of skills there, they'll feel like, okay, maybe you're not maybe very excellent at one. Like you just know small of everything. Or what do you think?
Yeah, so you have to kind of like strike a good balance, right? Like if you actually know those things and feel confident in talking about them in an interview setting, like definitely do put them on your resume because you want to also like highlight your candidacy with like maybe different like breadth or like depth of knowledge that you have. And also another benefit of like having like a lot of skills is that it could also just help you bypass like not some automated resume screening software that some companies have put into place. For example, like some company might be looking for like a Java developer, and if you don't have that keyword Java in there in your resume, unfortunately it might automatically skip you to the candidate, right? So those are the kind of situation that could like help you kind of bypass. But you also want to stay truthful because if the job is looking for a Java developer and you don't really have a Java skills, but you put it down anyhow, then you might be in like a very weird position where they might be expecting you to know Java, but you know nothing at all. In that case, like that could kind of create like really stressful situation or weird conversation down the line. So our recommendation is to stay as truthful as possible, but also kind of like jot down just as much as like what you know with regards to different skills or like programming languages. And another thing that you could do is also just like you can also make a note about like how familiar you're with like certain technology or language as well. So you could like write down most preferred language is like proficient or like intermediate, right? But maybe something that you don't feel too comfortable talking about, but maybe exposed in the past. That's like a beginner level, so that okay, you can at least have a disclaimer about like how much you know about that topic. So yeah, that's another thing that you could do to kind of like introduce more like detailed information about those things. Does that answer your question, Mel?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Any other questions from other folks in the crowd?
I have a question.
Okay.
Is it better to submit your resume in PDF or the Word doc?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, different websites support different format, but personally, I always go for PDF. With PDF, I get the assurance that I get like a basically a frozen copy of the resume as exactly as I see in that like document. Um, Whereas with with like Word doc, I have had issues in the past where like different websites or different tools like converted them in different ways. So then the spacing became off. Um, which I realized, okay, may have made my resume like untidy for like reviewers to look at. So this is why I personally only go for like a PDF copies now.
Got it. Also, another question. For example, if you don't have much internship experience, but you have other full-time job that is not tech related, should you put in the resume or should you skip it?
Did you say are they tech related or not tech related?
Not related.
Yeah. Yeah, in that case, I think if it's like your like most like recent one or two experiences, it'll still be good to put it down. And this is because like, okay, it may not be just like, related tech at all. And it could be like, some jobs that you picked up, along the way to like help pay for bills, which every one of us has to do. But at least highlights the skills that you have working like some kind of like team or like a corporate or like a paid environment before. So that could be like another good thing to put on your resume. But you have like a whole like strings of jobs, like 4 or 5 different jobs. That might detract away from your core message that you be like that you be like a good software engineer to work with, right? So this is like you might want to just keep it short to like 1 or 2 levels, and then highlight the other technical abilities that you have through the project section, that that you have gained exposure through your schoolwork, or through your like side project and things like that.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep, but great question, Alina. Any other questions? Yeah, just a heads up, but this is definitely something that we recommend going through with your mentor. Just send them your resume if you already have one. See what they would have to say as like a potential interviewer. And yeah, and if you don't have one, feel free to also use your time with a mentor to start building one. Once again, like a template that we have for you, or like using one of the online resume builders is like a good starting point. So yeah, so start with those like foundations, and hopefully you can also have a good resume by the time you come out of this project, by the time you come out of this program. But yeah, any other questions before we move on to the last section? Going once, going twice, going thrice. All right, we'll move on. And we'll start this section on behavioral questions. All right, so while we kind of like hearing or learning about behavioral interview questions, well, our motivation here is that these questions I ask my interviewers to get to know your personality, understand your resume more properly, or just to ease into an interview, right? But you still want to be prepared to answer these questions to give good signals to the interviewer that you'll be a good colleague to work with. So yeah, common patterns, or this is like a way in which you can recognize that you're being asked like a behavioral interview questions. So those questions often start in the following ways. So yeah, tell me about a time when like da 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 happened. Or what do you do when da 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 happens, right? Or have you ever worked with like this and that, right? Or give me an example of the time maybe you solved like a hard challenge. Or describe a time maybe when you faced like an unexpected issue, or whatever, right? So, but these are kind of common patterns in which behavioral questions could be asked in. And we'll actually get into more concrete examples here, but one example is like, tell me about a time when you had to prioritize on different tasks. Well, what do you do when you face a conflict with a teammate who's behind on their work? Or describe a time when you wished you had done something differently. And these questions are asked to see if you can like to basically measure different aspects of your basically like work strategy. So like basically your personality. So like things like prioritization framework, or things like time management, or things like conflict resolution, right? Those like all those soft skills that could be important in workplaces. You'll be asked to these behavioral interview questions. But yeah, once again, the good news is that you can still prepare for them. And here's like a strategy that we have that we recommend for you. So step 1 is that you want to pick the right story. Yeah, so you want to prepare stories to tell that could highlight your soft skills like teamwork, communication, time management, resilience, etc. And be prepared for like quote unquote negative questions, as the interviewers want to know how you handle conflicts. But yeah, don't let those questions like throw you off guard. You want to have like those like kind of like stories prepared, and you want to pick the right one to highlight those like specific aspect. And the step 2 is that you also want to make a statement. You want to make a statement that can lead to sharing what you learned from it. And don't make it about whether you're right, but how you grew from it. Like kind of like wrong way to go about it is like to say, oh, I was right, and the rest of my teammates were wrong, right? That's not really the message you want to come across, because you know what? When you kind of like enter the workplaces, there is going to be a time when someone makes a mistake, or like, or maybe you make a mistake, right? But you really don't want to make it about, okay, who was right or wrong and do the blaming game, but do things like, okay, what you learn from it, and you know, what you could have done to do differently next time, or what you learn from it so that you will be able to like do better next time. You want to kind of like turn it into that kind of positive direction, and make a statement about it. And lastly, you want to finish strong, right? You want to lastly connect that story back to the company or position and explain how that experience will be useful. And then just give a short summary, like just ending, wrapping that up. So this is the kind of like a 3-level like strategy, high-level strategy here. And to just like talk more about the specific techniques that you could use to kind of like execute on that strategy, is that you can use this technique called the STAR method. So STAR method is a simple framework that can help you tell a meaningful story about a previous work experience. And STAR just happens to stand for, you know, situation, and then T for task. So A for actions and R for results. And you kind of want to kind of go in that order. So starting with situation, you want to set the scene and give the necessary details, for example. So here you're kind of like, you know, painting the overall framework, the picture, so you can like set the context for the story, right? And then T is like task. So you want to like describe what your responsibility was in that situation, and what you had to do. And then A is for action. So then you explain what exact steps you have taken to address that situation at hand. And lastly, R is results. So you can share what outcomes came out of it because of your actions. So yeah, so this is we're gonna actually go through one example using the STAR method. So in this like kind of theoretical situation, the interviewer is asking, tell me about a time when you had to coordinate a complex task with multiple stakeholders. So let's start with an S or situation here. So in this like sample response, you could be saying, well, in my previous job, I was working on a project and realized that colleagues from other teams were also working on the same part of the code base. Thus, we were all rushing toward an important feature launch for the customers. Okay, now you're kind of setting this like kind of background story, even that kind of highlight the potential source of stress or like an issue, right? So then now moving on to T or task. I'm gonna say, well, I realized that we had to immediately start coordinating and identify which part of the code needs to be reconciled and which parts need to go in what order. Okay, now you're actually describing the responsibility that you finally that suddenly like fell upon you, or that you realized yourself, and things that you had to do at that moment. And then A's for action. So then let's describe the specific action that you took. So here the response is, well, I messaged these colleagues as well as my team's manager to set up a group meeting. And in preparation, I created a proposal document that lists the steps in how we can go about doing this. And then lastly, R is for results. So then you can say at the group meeting, people saw my proposal and came to consensus after sharing more feedback. In the end, we executed based on a plan and got to launch the feature just a few days late. While that wasn't ideal, but it was certainly better than facing further delays that we'll have to face if we didn't flag this issue until later, right? So in this example of like response, the outcome was not ideal. Like this like feature still got shipped late, but it still kind of like makes a message that, well, because of like the action that this person took, it still ended up being better than the alternative, which is maybe having this feature getting shipped even later because of realization not happening even later down the line. All right, so we covered this technique called STAR method, and now I'd like to introduce another technique called story grid. So this technique really helps you prepare different kinds of stories that you could also share at these interviews, and also help you practice using it. So what you want to do is that for like each type of like common type of questions, you want to come up with like different project or experience that could highlight that. So different types of common questions, as we talked about, include things like, okay, what was the most challenging things, what you learned from it, what was like most interesting thing about it, about that project or experience was, what the hardest bug or what the hardest challenge was, what you enjoyed most about it, or if there's like any conflict that you had, right? And those are the kind of different questions or aspects you should be prepared to answer. And you should basically also apply those questions to different types of projects. You also want to, and then what you do is for each like project and a question, you want to jot down couple of keywords that could help you kind of like memorize the answers or response that you would have for those, um, and get prepared. So yeah, this is like another exercise you could go through your own time. And you can kind of review this as like a cheat sheet before going into like a behavioral interview questions. So that you can kind of like, come up with those responses right away. Yeah, and lastly, just to kind of go over some common questions. Common questions include questions such as like, what are your weaknesses? What was the most challenging part of that project? Or like, lastly, do you have any questions for me? Which is the questions that interviewers like to ask at the very end. And we'll learn about how to best go over them. So first of all, with regards to this common question, what are your weaknesses? The tip that we have for you is to give a genuine answer. You want to give a genuine answer here because it shows that you have self-awareness and can be capable of making up for it. So like an okay answer, just say something like, I work too hard, right? A lot of people like to say this, but you know what? Hopefully people do work hard when they work in like team environment, because then because you'll be working toward a common goal as a collective in that setting. But then maybe something like that's good, or even better to say it is to give a genuine answer. So you could say, I tend to be an optimistic person. While that gives me confidence in taking on challenges, sometimes that can also get in the way of estimating a realistic project timeline. Because of that, I tend to remind myself there's tendency when estimating a timeline, and sometimes even ask my colleagues to check my assumption. And guess what? This is actually my personal weakness. Like I tend to be optimistic and oftentimes come with a really rosy expectations about when things could get done. But there are like these ways in which I do to help correct for that tendency, which is to like ask for help from my colleagues, as well as just kind of like reminding myself that tendency and like correcting that that actual timeline estimate. So yeah, this is kind of like the like example answer to like the question, what are your weaknesses? Once again, you want to highlight, you want to give a genuine answer, and also like highlight some aspects that you're aware of it and that you're doing something to fix that. All right, and then moving on to the second common question, what was the most challenging part of that project? Here you want to give concrete and detailed answers. Concrete and detailed answer shows that you are deeply involved in the project and you can reflect on various challenges that you faced. And to go over some examples, an okay answer is to say, yeah, well, I had to learn a lot of new languages. Well, this is just an okay answer because a lot of times this applies to everyone who's going to like a new project. But so yeah, so like a better way and a good way to say it is to be concrete and detailed. So you can just kind of go through the sample response. Well, the biggest challenge was fixing this bug that kept failing to have to fetch new object from the API. We investigated code several times but couldn't seem to find the root cause. So what we started to do was test various theories, and in the end, the root cause turned out to be the app's caching policy that made the app always use cache data instead of new data from the API. And we didn't notice it because it was our first time using the new API framework, and the configuration for this caching policy was not in the official documentation. To kind of like go over this, doesn't really matter whether you the details of this response. The kind of like the whole point of this is to kind of show how detailed and concrete sometimes you want to be in these responses, because it really shows you that you were involved with that project and you really like thought deeply about overcoming some of the challenges that came up along the way. So all right, and then lastly, the crowd's favorite, which is like, what questions do you have for me? A lot of interviewers like to ask this. Also, just kind of give a chance for you to ask questions and also help you learn more about the work. So the things that you want to do here is to ask good questions. Quality of your question can also serve as a signal for the interviewer about how interested you are in the job. So even though it's an opportunity for you to like ask question, it's actually sometimes could be a good opportunity for you to also show your interest even more. And there are actually like 3 question categories that you could ask. The first category is to ask genuine questions. And the purpose of asking these kind of questions to ask, you want to ask to understand more about the day-to-day life of the work. So examples of that could be questions such as, how much of a day do you spend coding in? Or what does the team composition look like? What are the good parts and bad parts of this work? It's very genuine, but these are something that you ask about the job to like also help you understand more about it and also help you think about whether you actually see yourself working in that environment or not. And the second type of question is insightful questions. It's a little bit like a sales strategy, but this is a question you can ask to demonstrate your deep domain knowledge. So, for example, you could say, "I noticed that you use technology X, but how do you use that technology to solve problem Y?" Or like, how do you think about the SLA or service level agreement? Like, what measures do you have to maintain that level of SLA? This might be like really relevant if you're working for like an API first company or company that's like working in enterprise space, and these kind of things are important. And lastly, the last question category is passion questions. This is like a question. These are questions they can ask to demonstrate your passion for technology. So let's say you can ask questions like, "I'm very interested in scalability, and I'm kind of curious, like, did you come in with that background, or like, what opportunities did you have at that workplace to learn about it?" Or you can say, "Hey, you know what? I'm not really familiar with this technology, but it sounds like a very interesting solution. Can you tell me about like, how that applies in your workplace or how that could work?" And these are the questions they can ask to basically like demonstrate your passion and show that you're excited about potentially working there. And a lot of your interviews like that because it shows you that you have done your homework of like looking up what the company works with, and also shows you that you're curious in like individual, which is like a good quality to have as a software engineer that's constantly like learn new things. All right, so that wrapped up a section on behavioral interview questions, and which kind of wraps up our presentation for today. So yeah, just want to spend the last few minutes here for Q&A to see if you have any questions that you would like to ask about anything that we covered today. Any questions?
I have a question. So for the projects that you put on your resume, is it a good idea to put whether it was a team project or individual project?
Yeah, I mean, it's both. Once again, you have like a limited like number of projects, you probably want to put down both of them, and be ready to also answer anything that you may be asked about like each one of those projects. If you do have like a large like list of projects, then you probably want to like selectively pick the ones that you were like in which you were like most involved in, and therefore could share like more interesting stories. So yeah, it really depends on your own project and your experience with it, but doesn't necessarily need to have like strict rules about, oh, always prioritize individual over team or vice versa, like nothing like that. So
But should you like indicate explicitly whether it was a team project or individual?
oh yeah, I mean, you could I think easily highlight that. You could just put a parenthesis says like team project or individual project like right next to the project name. Or you could also like kind of hint at that in the description. You could say, yeah, I worked with a team to build like XYZ, right? So that would suggest that you work in a team. Or you could say, I worked as an individual project to build like XYZ or whatever. So yeah, these are the like little details you could add to kind of like add that details.
Okay. And also, for example, if a student is graduating, say May, and what's the best time to start applying for the jobs?
Yeah, so if you're gonna be graduating in May, the best time to start applying is probably now. Just to talk about the timeline. And this also applies for like, younger students who may be looking for internship as well. But a lot of times, both summer interns as well as like new grad, they will start their new role in the summertime, or for like new grad, it might start in the fall. But recruiting season for that is actually starts in the fall in the prior year. So it's already toward the end of September, which means that a lot of companies are already going out to like different universities to like host career fairs to participate in career fairs, and they're basically building like a list of resumes that they will go through and start setting up an interview with. Um, so this is the kind of earliest companies. But some companies like to do this later, like they might actually do this like once the new year starts. So they will do this in like late January or like February and things like that. But so there's like some bit of a range here, but to kind of capture like all entire like range of companies, this is why it would be good to start now, to even get on the earliest company that are doing the recruiting, that are already doing the recruiting. So
Got it. Thank you.
yep, great questions, Alima. Any other questions? If you don't feel comfortable speaking out loud, you can also feel free to post it in chat, and we can get through those questions as well. Guessing, okay, got another question from Lisa. The question is, how long do we have to consider an offer? Let's see. Well, the answer is unfortunately it kind of depends. But from like new grad, you guys kind of have like a special treatment from a lot of companies. So some companies understand that you new grad and you kind of going through the interview process with multiple companies, and you also have like schoolwork to keep up with. So some companies like to give you like in a scale of like 1 or 2 months for like a timeline between like an offer to decision. So that's like a good case, because now you actually have like a longer time to think about whether you want to like take that job offer and join their companies, or maybe like wait until you also hear results back from other companies. Otherwise, the standard in the industry is like anywhere from 1 or 2 weeks. In which case, you may also want to be like more careful about whether you want to go with that job offer or not. Of course, you could try to negotiate to see you could have that offer extended. Just explain that. You can explain that you're going through like interview process with other companies as well, and would like to see that timeline being like extended. And a lot of times companies are still willing to do that. If not, then you have to think, okay, is this a good time to stop now? Like, would I be happy to work for this company? And if your gut says no, or like based on hearing experience of like others working there, and that turns out to be not so positive, then you may want to say, okay, no, like I probably should keep on looking for like other jobs and then pass on this opportunity. Which I know it's really hard to do, because once you have an offer, kind of want to just let it stop and just go with it. But sometimes you have to make that hard decision to go for like even better opportunities. So yeah, that's the kind of like thought process or the timeline that you would probably have in the other case. And then other question, Liza, you asked, if we negotiate with the company and the company rejects it, then would that be a rejection from the company? Yeah, no, that doesn't necessarily mean like a rejection. It just means that they're not willing to consider extending that timeline for you. But that will still like have like an offer being extended to you. So and that's the other thing, is like don't be afraid to like negotiate with companies. Of course, it's better to have like multiple offers at hand that you can like choose and pick from. But there are like certain aspects about the job that you're not happy about, whether that's like offered like a compensation or like an offered timeline to make a decision. You could always try to like talk to your recruiter, and your recruiter would usually try to do something to at least like satisfy some parts of your request. So as long as you're not being like unreasonable, like let's say maybe you're asking for like a $1 million in total compensation as like a new grad, then I might just like kind of think you're like joking with them and like throw you out of like the offer. But as long as the ask is reasonable, you shouldn't be afraid to like make that request. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
I had a question.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, JD.
Oh, okay, sorry, just because I know we're almost out of time. So if you eventually end up having multiple offers from different companies, what would be the best like resource to figure out like which offer to choose in terms of figuring out like the work culture, the work-life balance, etc.? Because I feel like if I just talk to recruiters, they're just gonna say this same thing, like positive things. So to get a bit more realistic idea of just what to expect.
Yeah, in terms of what to expect, of course, like different people is gonna have like different preferences along different dimensions, and those dimensions include things like the compensation level, like work-life balance, what the actual like learning opportunity is gonna be. And sometimes it's also really important to know like who the exact manager or what the exact team is gonna be. Because different big companies have multiple teams with different type of like managers and their personalities, as well as different teams with like different responsibility and stress level and whatnot, right? So these are the things that you really need to kind of like dive into yourself to really understand. Um, but assuming, okay, you're kind of like thinking about offers, that could, that are more or less on the same level with compensation. And now you really want to understand what the work is about. The different things that you can do. First, like even without like talking to like an individual from the company, you could try to like look up reviews about working in that experience using websites such as the Glassdoor, or there are like also like anonymous websites out there that you could also try to sign up and see what people had to say. So yeah, try to see if you can try to like get some like reviews about past or current employees working there, about what they have to say about that workplace. Otherwise, other things that you can do is you could try to also use LinkedIn to see if any of your friends or like acquaintances also work at the organization. And if that's the case, then they are definitely like a good, people to reach out to, and try to ask like if you can like meet up with some little coffee, or like just get on like a 30-minute phone call so you just talk to you about those workplace things. And being friends or like being acquaintances, they will try to give you like the most genuine impression of that workplace. And lastly, that option is not available, then you kind of have to like rely on basically like a third degree connection, which means like either reaching out to your your basically recruiter about potentially setting up like some kind of like a meeting with one of the teammates or manager that you might be working for, or even like reaching out to like other people that are working at that company, to see if they'll be willing to meet up with you to talk about those things, right? So those are different kind of like things that you want to do to figure it out. And once again, like a lot of things also depends on like a team, depends on the team, right? Because different teams would be having different managers, different work responsibility. They may be even working on different like technology. So you want to kind of like get all the possible notes that you have on those things, compare with like the same set of notes from other companies or you have an offer from, and see what really speaks out to you the most in terms of like how excited you'll be about the job and how good it will be for your future career goals. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
All right, awesome. Okay, so I know we're at a time, and thank you guys for sitting through this like 90-minute long presentation. Yeah, definitely want to give like the rest of the weekend back to you guys. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to kind of like post it on Slack. There will be like different members of a community that are more than happy to answer your questions. Your mentor is always a great person to go to if you want to like follow up on some of the suggested exercises of like setting up resumes and whatnot. But otherwise, yeah, stay tuned for like a follow-up email from us with regards to how to prepare for next week's lesson, in which we'll be starting the flipped classroom format and yeah, and having like a live coding exercise and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's it for now. Thank you guys so much once again, and I hope you guys have a nice rest of the weekend.
Thank you so much.